On the 13th of January 2012, at 7:15 p.m., the world's largest Italian cruise ship set sail for its 7-day European tour. This ship was named the Costa Concordia. It was so big that not only was it larger than the Titanic, but it could also seat an additional 2,000 passengers. That's why 4,252 people were on board. If we talk about entertainment, this ship had everything. 4 big swimming pools, 5 restaurants, 13 different bars, a casino, a basketball court, a huge fitness center with a gym, a sauna, a Turkish bath, and even an F1 racing simulator was installed on this cruise ship. The first destination of this ship was Savona, a city in Italy, and it was supposed to take about a day to reach there. However, only 2.5 hours after the ship departed, everyone heard a sudden piercing noise. After that, all the lights on the ship went off, and the ship started tilting towards one side. The time was 9:45 p.m., a time when some people were sleeping in their rooms and some were eating at the dinner tables. Some people who were sleeping woke up and they came out of their cabins to see what was happening. Meanwhile, the plates of the people sitting at the dinner table started sliding down the side of the table. Passengers were told via intercom that there was an electrical failure on the ship.
In a blackout, we've experienced electrical failure.
But the fact was that the engine of the ship had failed. The captain of the ship was hiding this fact from the people. After a while, the ship started tilting to the other side. By then, the passengers somewhat realized that this was not an ordinary electrical failure. People were worried that this was another incident similar to the Titanic's. Coincidentally, the Titanic accident happened exactly 100 years ago in 1912. And now, when this ship had an electrical failure, the famous Titanic theme song was playing in the dining hall of this ship, "My Heart Will Go On." Slowly, the ship started tilting more. It tilted to the right side, and the lower rooms were being filled with water. By then, people had realized that the ship was going to sink. But why were the passengers not being informed properly? Why was the ship's captain so quiet? This ship was operated by an Italian company called Costa Concordia. Initially, this company operated only cargo ships. But in 1948, they launched their Costa lines. Soon after, it became one of the biggest cruise ship companies in Europe. Later, in 2000, a company named Carnival Corporation bought it. So Costa Concordia became a subsidiary company of Carnival. In June 2006, they launched their first ship of the Concordia class, the Costa Concordia that we're talking about today, the biggest Italian cruise ship of its time. The cost of making it was $570 million. That day, the captain of this ship was Francesco Schettino, an Italian man who had been working for this company since 2002. Remember his name because he plays an important role in our story. At 7:18 p.m., this ship left for its first destination, Savona, and only 2 hours had passed that this ship deviated from its normal route. It was not a mistake. Captain Schettino wanted to take the ship by a particular island, the Giglio Island in Italy. He wanted the people of the island to see the glittering ship in the dark of night. Whenever a ship passes near the land, it is called a sail past or sail by. Normally, such big ships sail at a distance of 7-8 kilometers from the shore well into the sea because the water needs to be deep enough for such a big ship to sail. But because of this sail by, the ship was only 150 meters away from the shore. Obviously, the water was not very deep. There can be big rocks or reefs under the ship at this close distance, which can hit the ship. On top of that, it was nighttime, and the ship was sailing quite fast. Later, the report of the Italian Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport confirmed this. At night, the ship was sailing at an unsafe distance, very close to the shore. One question that will arise here, why was the captain doing this? The thing is, Captain Schettino used to work under Senior Captain Mario Palombo, and Mario was living on the Giglio Island the night this ship was passing by this island. That night, Captain Schettino called Mario and told him that since they would be passing by the island, they would sound a siren for him, as they wanted to give him a tribute. To this, Mario said that he was not on the island. Instead, he was in another Italian city. During this conversation, the call line gets disconnected. This call was made at 9:40 p.m., and a few minutes later came the scary sound that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The thing everyone feared happened. This shit collided with the rocks in the water. This collision tore the hull of the Concordia ship. The ship's sensitive part was injured by a 70-meter-long wound. The place where this impact happened was not even 100 meters away from the island. In the darkness of the night, this S-hip had reached so close to the island. Water started flowing into the ship rapidly. 26-year-old Andre Corallo, who was the third officer of the Concordia ship, was sleeping in his cabin when this incident happened. When he woke up and came out of his cabin, he saw that the water had already reached the hallway. He immediately ran to the engine room. When he reached there, he saw that the door could not be opened. Through the closed door, he could see that the generators and engines were completely submerged in water. At 9:52 p.m., the chief engineer and the other officers of the engine room tried to start the emergency diesel generator. Unfortunately, they failed in this attempt. The chief engineer went to inform Captain Schettino about how bad the situation was. But the captain of the ship announced to the passengers that there was nothing to worry about, that it was a simple blackout.
A nome del nostro comandante, le chiediamo gentilmente di tornare alla vostra cabina o se desiderate essere in giro per il salone. Una volta che noi abbiamo finito di sistemare il problema che abbiamo, il problema elettrico del generatore, tutto sarà calma.
Over the next few minutes, the ship was not standing still. Rather, it was moving forward, away from the island. At around 10 p.m., Captain Schettino felt that the ship should be turned around. He reasoned that if they sank, it would be more dangerous to be in the middle of the sea. It would be better to stay near the island. The ship took a U-turn, and thus, instead of being upright, it started tilting to the other side. First, it was tilting to the left. Now, it started tilting to the right. The ship's crisis coordinator, Roberto Ferrarini, called Captain Schettino twice, at 10:05 p.m. and 10:07 p.m. In the second call, Captain Schettino finally acknowledged that the ship had some problems. But had he admitted these problems sooner, it would have been better. Captain Schettino did admit his mistake, but follows it with another act of stupidity. He tried to cover up his mistakes. He claimed that the blackout caused the accident. He reverses the timeline. In reality, the accident caused the blackout. In the meanwhile, some distressed passengers tried to call the local police. At 10:12 p.m., the Italian Coast Guard called the ship's captain, asking him what was happening on the ship and informing him that passengers of the ship were contacting them. On the other hand, the captain said that nothing devastating had happened. They simply had a blackout. He told them not to worry. When this was said, half an hour had already passed since the collision. 10 more minutes pass, and Captain Schettino finally changed his stance. After all, how long could he suppress the truth with lies? At 10:22 p.m., Schettino told the radio operator to call and inform the Coast Guard that there had been a collision on the left side of the ship and that Concordia needed the help of tugboats, and that life jackets were handed out to the passengers and everyone was safe. Each minute was important here because the ship was gradually tilting more and more. Finally, at 10:33 p.m., a general emergency alarm was raised, and the passengers were told to gather in the emergency assembly areas and wait for further instructions. At 10:48 p.m., the ship was tilted 30 degrees. More than an hour had passed since the accident. At 10:54 p.m., finally, Captain Schettino gave orders to abandon the ship. Think about it, friends. More than 4,200 people were stuck on this ship, and this ship was tilted by 30 degrees. Many of the lower cabins were submerged in the water, and things were strewn about in the upper decks. Nothing was in its place. In this situation, the captain had made only one reasonable decision: to take a U-turn. Now, based on this one good decision, the lying, egoistic captain was trying to garner support and wanted people to see him as a hero because of this decision. Undoubtedly, this decision was needed, But the rest of his decisions were unreasonable and entirely wrong decisions. On top of that, he was piling up his lies and misguiding passengers on this sinking ship. Later on, our captain did something after which he was thoroughly criticized by the people. As soon as he gave the order to abandon the ship, there was a huge commotion in Concordia. Some people had already fled using lifeboats before this announcement. Some of the others were confident that they could swim, so they jumped into the water. They swam to the island nearby. But after the signal by the captain, chaos ensued. The mob of passengers ran towards the lifeboats. People pushed and shoved one another to get to the lifeboats. One good thing was that, fed up by Captain Schettino's behavior, some of the crew members were already rebelling against the captain. 10 to 15 minutes before his order, the passengers were taken out of their cabins and put into the lifeboats.
A steward came over to us because the key card wasn't working and told us, "Take your coat, take your life jacket."
In the darkness of the night, the ship was slowly falling to the right. A 40-degree tilt, a 50-degree tilt. By this point, the passengers whose cabins were on the right side had reached the surface level of the sea, so they could easily jump into the water and head towards the island. But the problem was for those who were on the other side of the ship. In a tilted ship, how could they find the way out? Most of the passengers on the cruise ship were Italian, but many of the crew members did not know Italian. On top of that, another problem was that most of the crew members were not trained for such emergency situations. They were just service staff. Despite all these problems, some crew members were truly heroes. On the other hand, there were people like Captain Schettino, who, instead of helping the passengers, abandoned the ship at the earliest and went towards the island.
Italian cruise ship captain who apparently ran for a lifeboat and got off the wreck while his crew and passengers were still on board fighting for their lives.
Yup, you heard that right. The same captain who tried to cover it up with lies wasted an hour before telling the truth to the passengers. And as soon as he made the announcement, within some minutes, at 11:19 p.m., he was among the first crew members to abandon the ship. Giglio Island is like a small village. Not many people live there. This island has a population of only 700 people. But that night, when the incident happened, some people came out of their homes to see what was happening. As soon as the deputy mayor of this island, Mario Pellegrini, came to know that a ship was sinking, despite being a civilian, he went to the ship to help the people. Without thinking for a minute, he jumped into the lifeboat and went into the sea to help the people. He said that when the ship had completely fallen to the right side, wells of water were being formed inside the ship, and people were trapped in these. He arranged for a rope and used the rope to rescue the people trapped in the well. In this early stage of evacuation, around 2,500 to 3,000 people had safely reached the island. At 11:38 p.m., around 400 people were still trapped in the ship. The Italian Coast Guard helicopters and fire and rescue services boats had also arrived to help people. They saved a few hundred people from underwater, but they didn't know how many more people were still trapped in the ship. At 12:42 p.m., the Coast Guard commander, Captain Gregorio De Falco, called Captain Schettino.
Io sono De Falco da Livorno, parlo col comandante?
Sì, buonasera, comandante Di Falco.
Mi dica il suo nome, per favore.
Il comandante Schettino, comandante.
Schettino?
Sì.
Ascolti, Schettino.
In his anger, he told Schettino directly that as the captain, he should go back on the ship. He ordered Schettino to go back and find out about the passengers still on board.
Lei quella piscaccina la percorre in senso inverso, sale sulla nave e mi dice quante persone e che cosa hanno a bordo, chiaro?
He told Schettino that he shouldn't have left his passengers and ran away.
Guardi, Schettino, che lei si è salvato forse dal mare, ma io la porto veramente molto male, faccio passare l'anima di guai. Vado a bordo.
Schettino started making excuses and saying that he couldn't go back.
Sto andando perché ci sta l'altra lancia che si è fermata.
Lei vada a bordo, è un ordine. Lei non deve fare altre valutazioni, lei ha dichiarato l'abbandono nave.
Despite all of this, Captain Schettino did not go back. This is why people started calling him Captain Coward later. On one hand, some brave crew members and the Italian Coast Guard team kept helping people all night. Schettino sat at a safe distance and watched it play out. When the sun rose the next morning and the ship could be seen properly, people realized the magnitude of the incident. Look at these photos taken in the morning. Exactly where this collision happened. You can see that part too. The sheer size of the collision. Most of the people had been rescued by morning. 3 people had been confirmed dead, but some people were still trapped in the ship. Meanwhile, the residents of Giglio had found out about this incident, and many locals went to help. 700 people were living on the island, but there were 4,000 people on the ship. The residents opened their homes to provide shelter to the passengers. Elizabeth Nani, who worked in Giglio Tourist Information, reported that all the survivors were in shock. Some people were suffering from hypothermia because the water was very cold, but everyone was desperate and was trying to locate their family members and friends. Schools, churches, and canteens on this island were opened so that the survivors could get a roof over their heads. They were also given blankets and dry clothes. However, on the other hand, the rescue operation was still ongoing. It would last for the next 2 weeks. The Italian Navy, Coast Guard, Fire and Rescue Service, everyone had to get involved. Rescue divers were also needed because the people trapped were unable to open the cabin doors. The water pressure on the other side was so high that they remained trapped inside the cabin. On the 14th of January, a South Korean couple was rescued, trapped in their cabin. Most of the casualties in this incident occurred because of this. Trapped inside their cabin, they drowned. Had they been informed on time, their lives could also have been saved. A total of 32 people perished in this accident. The subsequent challenge was to remove fuel from the sunken ship and to rescue the ship so that it would not remain lying there. When engineers analyzed the ship, it was declared a constructive total loss. This meant that there was no chance of saving it. The ship could not be used again. The only option was to disassemble it and sell its scrap metal. First of all, the ship contained around 1.9 million liters of fuel. It was a fully loaded ship. It had just started sailing. That's why the fuel tank was full. To extract fuel, an oil barrier was built around the ship. On 12 February 2012, the oil removal process began. Since it was wintertime, another problem was that a lot of fuel was in a semi-solid state. So, it was necessary to reheat it before extracting it. After heating it, another tanker ship was used and all the oil was transferred from one vessel to the other with a pump. This process lasted more than a month. This process continued till 24th March. Now, the next thing was to set the ship upright and to relocate. It was an engineering project. A steel structure was built in the water so that the ship could be raised once again. Work on this started a year later, in April 2013. After this, huge boxes were placed on the upper side of the ship. Water was filled in these boxes to make them heavier. Ropes and cables were then used to pull these boxes as weights. These watertight boxes are called caissons. 15 such caissons were installed in total. On 16th September 2013, the actual process of straightening the Concordia began. It took 19 hours to do this. You can see how this was done by using pulling machines, steel structures, and caissons. The next step was to make the ship float on water. For this, more boxes were used. Caissons were installed on the other side as well. After that, water was drained out from the caissons, which caused the caissons to float. And as the caissons started floating, the entire ship started floating with them.
A sound usually used to warn, blared out to shout success.
500 divers, technicians, engineers, and biologists were involved in this process. 19 months had passed since the accident, and the cost of rescuing this ship alone was $799 million. To take this ship to the port, another ship was used to tow it. This was done in July 2014. Till then, total cost of this operation had reached $1.2 billion. But the company still had more such expenses to bear. It took a lot of effort and money to scrap metal from this broken ship. More than 350 people worked on this, and this process ended in July 2017. But after rescuing people, a steady stream of legal cases had begun. Finally, this company returned the price of each surviving passenger's ticket and paid an additional €11,000 as compensation. Apart from this, the families of the deceased passengers were paid an undisclosed amount. The total cost of this disaster for this company was $2 billion. But you must be wondering, what happened to the captain of the ship? The guy who was the sole reason behind this incident lied to his passengers and didn't give them timely information. And when the ship started sinking, he abandoned the ship first and ran away. Even after the incident, Captain Schettino's habit of lying didn't go away. When the case was being tried in court, he told the court that when the ship was at an angle of 60 degree to 70 degree, his foot slipped and he fell into a lifeboat. And he, apparently, fell in a peculiar way that he was shipped off. Obviously, no one found this argument believable. The judge did not believe this at all. In 2017, Captain Schettino was charged with manslaughter and he was sentenced to 16 years in jail. Along with Captain, 5 people were arrested, especially the high-ranking officers on the ship that night. Each of them was sentenced to 2 years because the biggest mistake was made by Captain Schettino. Today, 11 years after this incident, Schettino is serving his sentence in jail. And if you learn anything from the story, it is this: never give the captaincy of your ship to a lying coward who doesn't know how to admit his mistakes. Leaders who never admit to their mistakes and lie to hide their mistakes can be extremely dangerous.